Welcome. Thanks for coming on this holiday weekend. Appreciate it very much. And now we're going to start with an invocation by Chaplain Terry.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we graciously thank you on this day that we celebrate our country. We celebrate our country that you have given us, that we may worship you, the Lord our God. We thank you for the blessings of those who have served, for the lives that were given, for the work that is given. Help us, Father, to always remember that our life is but a gift, not only from your blessed hand, but from the love that people give to one another, the love of neighbor, the love of you. Guide us this day that we never walk in your great graces, that we may walk and continually to give thanks of one another. We ask this in your Holy Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
Thank you very much, Chaplain. And now we're going to have the national anthem as sung by our choir, the Mason Point Choir. So if you're able to stand, please do. Thanks to Chuck, who recorded this, and thanks to the Mason Point Choir. We'll have to save this for other opportunities. Yeah. So, again, thanks for coming. And our speaker today is Fran Scholl. And Fran, she was born and raised in St. Louis, but at 12 years of age, she already knew she wanted to be in the military. Her father was a Navy veteran, and she had uncles who served, some in the Merchant Marines, like I had an uncle in the Merchant Marines, which are now considered to be veterans. They weren't initially. And after graduating from Maryville College, with a nursing degree, Fran joined the Air Force, and she served multiple assignments in the U.S. and several overseas assignments. She retired in 1995 as a lieutenant colonel, and she now lives with her husband in Perry County. I know Perry County is familiar landscape to a number of you. So please welcome Fran Scholl.
Thank you so much. I want to first thank Janet, who thought I could tell a good story. I hope I don't disappoint. And to Hank for all of the technology, because I can muddle through on my 12-year-old computer at home, but This is going to be gee whiz new stuff. So let's see, I'm going to figure out the going down pages. Yeah, so as Hank said, St. Louis child, third of 11, first girl. So from the age of 7, I was feeding babies, changing diapers, cooking supper while mom did the same thing to those other kids, and had a lot of fun with it, sort of. Except that I knew by the time I was 21, I wasn't going to do that for very much longer. Now, like Hank said, my dad and his 5 brothers, and let me see if I can get that picture to come up. This is my dad with the corsage, my Nana, Grandma Flynn, and on the end is my Uncle Edmund, and he served in the Army Air Corps before the Air Force. I think he did eventually transfer to the Air Force because he died in San Antonio Hospital in 1960-something from heart problems that incurred from an infection he got while in Southeast Asia. My dad was a Navy avionics maintenance guy, I think, or ammunition maintenance guy, I think. I don't know for sure. Uncle Gene is next to my dad. He was in the Army and the Missouri Guard. Uncle Owen, next to Nana, was a jet pilot in the Navy during World War II. Uncle Bill was an underwater demolition specialist, which is the precursors to the SEALs, the Navy SEALs. And Uncle Bob was the Merchant Marine. So I also have, now why is this doing this? Okay. The next, okay. My Aunt Ann on this side is my mom's baby sister. My mother had 4 brothers. 3 of them served, 2 of them during World War II, 1 of them post-World War II. Winton was disqualified because he played golf so much as a child. He had lumps on his shoulders and they disqualified him medically. Then, that was in the 50s. Then in the 60s, when they were ramping up for Vietnam, they wanted to draft him after he had a wife and 3 kids. Typical military, you know. But this is their baby sister, Ann. She's about 10 or 11 years older than me, and she joined the Army, first in the reserves and then eventually full-time active, and she retired with a 28-year career. So this is her as a lieutenant colonel in '92, about 4 years before she retired. So she and I never were assigned together. We visited some when I was on the East Coast, but she had a very different path than me. She was actually in the WACs to begin with, and then in the 70s that was absorbed into the primary services. So lots of background in the military, but not a direct influence at the time that most people recognized. This is my family Christmas picture in 1962. There are only 9 of us, except my mom's pregnant with my 10th sibling. And you can see me on the far side there. My oldest brother is Jim in the back here, and Tom's next to me. Tom provided some of these pictures for me. Traditional family roles, you know, the girls did the chores, the boys went out and mowed the grass. I did not like that. I was a tomboy, and I didn't really want to be a homemaker. So, went to high school after parochial grade school. It was a small private all-girls high school in St. Charles called the Academy of the Sacred Heart. I rode the bi-state bus. The first year I transferred in the Wellston Depot. And so the education began before I got to classroom and after I got home. I saw things on the Wellston route that I did not need to see as a 14 or 15 or 16-year-old, but you know, you grow up. Twice on each route, when I went up to school and home, I would see a sign, a metal road sign that said, "Go Air Force." And I read it every day. It was like subliminal hypnosis or brainwashing, maybe. So when I got through high school, I considered going to Rolla because I'd actually tested well enough on national testing exams, in the STEM program that Rolla actually sent me an invitation to come for a tour. My dad, of course, had graduated from Rolla with a mechanical engineering degree, so he went with me on the site visit to Rolla. But I got there, didn't see any girls besides myself, didn't know any other girls that were going to be there, and kind of got cold feet. And my one brother was already at Mizzou, and my other brother was trying to go to college. I think he was at one of the community colleges in St. Louis to begin with, but he was wanting to go to Mizzou as well. So my mother said, well, Maryville's got this program. It's a 2-year degree program in nursing. You should try it. So I went and looked at it and thought, okay, I probably can manage that. So I went to Maryville, got a 2-year degree, 5 semesters, and an Associate of Arts degree. So this is me in college playing on the flag football team at Maryville before they got the Saints team. And that's me when I graduated nursing school. I think that's outside of my part-time job that I had at St. John's after I graduated but didn't have my RN. I was what they call a graduate nurse, awaiting my license. So in '74, before I finished graduating, I had actually had, the Maryville people had a recruiter come to the base, to the school, and talk to us about military careers. And I went to the recruiter's office downtown in St. Louis to find out what I needed to do to get in, and I didn't tell my parents until I'd already committed. Because, you know, I didn't want to have a fight. And there was, my older brother thought I was nuts for going in the military. My mom was not happy about it, but my dad thought it made sense because I kept saying, it's only for 4 years, it's only for 4 years. That, of course, changed over time. But because of my age, because I graduated with a 2-year degree instead of 4, I was only 20 when I graduated, and I had to wait until I was 21 to be commissioned. So I actually was, took my oath in December, but got on active duty in February. So this is my where in the world is Fran map, sort of. My first assignment was Idaho, then I went to the Philippines, Louisiana for about 3 months, Arizona, via Texas, Delaware, which doesn't hardly show on this map, North Carolina, Germany, Scott, Lodges, Scott. And of course, home was Missouri all the time, so I was not real close to home until the later part of the years. My first 3 assignments were as a clinical nurse. I was commissioned, a direct commission into the Nurse Corps, which is not the line of the Air Force. And my first assignment was Mountain Home, Idaho. I had 2 very memorable patients there. One was a retired 06 who had come to Mountain Home to visit somebody, and he was in the VOQ. He'd gotten up in the middle of the night, gone to the bathroom, came back to the bed. The bed had a wooden headboard, like a bookshelf. When he laid down, apparently he cracked his head on that headboard. And so he came to the ER and got stitches put in, and as he was they were going to discharge him back to the queue. As he was leaving the ER, he had some symptoms. He vomited. And that's, of course, a head injury symptom you don't want to have. They pulled him back in, put him in a wheelchair, and brought him down for admission, but they failed to call the doctor they were admitting him to. When he came past the nurse's station first, his wife was with him, and I spoke to him, and he was very coherent, and everything looked fine. It seemed like it would be a very easy patient. I said, go down to the bay, and I'll be down in a minute to do your admissions. When I got down there, 3 to 5 minutes after that, he was mumbling, and I couldn't make out what he was saying. Now, I had just had a conversation with him. It made sense. And I was like, I looked at his wife. I said, do you know what he's saying? I can't understand what he's saying. She said, I have no clue what he's saying. I said, he wasn't like this 5 minutes ago, was he? She said, no. I went back up, and I called the doctor he'd been admitted to. That's when I found out they hadn't notified the doctor. The doctor was livid that he hadn't been told. Ran over to the hospital from the officer family housing area, came in through the back door, which back in those days, we didn't even lock the doors, you know, how things have changed. he assessed the situation and he said, he went up to the nurse's station, he called Boise, which is an hour's drive from Mountain Home. And he said, we're going in an ambulance and Flynn, you're coming with. I was like, I've never even been in an ambulance yet. And I was like, okay, my shift was just ending because this guy had come in on the ward about 5 a.m. This was like 5:30. And the day shift people, I dropped what I was doing, jumped in the ambulance. We hauled our butts up there. Idaho has prairie dogs. Prairie dogs like the heat on the asphalt. 65 miles an hour on the highway. Boom, boom, boom. I don't know how many we killed along the way, but we saved one man's life. We got to Boise. They had this brand new machine called a CAT scan. I mean, I'd read about these in school, but I had never seen one work. We hauled him into the x-ray department. They laid him out he was on the gurney and they put him in that machine. And we stood back and looked at a CRT screen and watched as this goose egg appeared under the man's skull, which is called a subdural hematoma. And if we hadn't have done this for him, he probably would not have lived a few more hours that day. He would have herniated his brainstem, I think. And I mean, that does happen sometimes. They zipped him immediately from the x-ray to the OR. The neurosurgeon in Boise allowed the neurologist to scrub with him. I scrubbed, but I stood at the doorway of the OR and watched while they had him draped on the table, and they used a Dremel to remove his skull cap, and down fell the blood clot that was the size of my fist, rolled down the drape and hit the floor. And that would have killed him if it hadn't have been removed. He was put back together, the captain and I, the doctor, the neurologist, and I went back home. I got my sleep. I came back in the night shift that night, and I said to the doctor, how is he? And he said, well, I don't know, let's call up to Idaho, and up to Boise. Back then, you know, you had to have a number to allow you to use a toll call. And so we call the front hospital number, and they patch us through to the ICU, and the nurse says, he's doing great. He's sitting up in bed, he's eating his supper, and he's gonna be fine. I was like, whoa. But, you know, the term we heard when I went in the Air Force was, the nurse corps eats its own. And the conclusion of that story is, you save a guy's life, that's not worthy of anything recognition-wise. So I never got a medal when I left Idaho. But we had a second patient who was a Native American who had come in by helicopter, had about 7 different diagnoses, all bad. Congestive heart failure, liver problems, cirrhosis, edema everywhere, high blood pressure, diabetes, and I don't remember everything else. And I don't know either one of these guys' names. But with HIPAA now, I wouldn't be able to tell you anyway. We gave him intensive care for 2 weeks. We didn't have an ICU at Mountain Home. We only had a 60-bed, 2-ward hospital. But we took care of him very, very well for 2 weeks, and he was coming around. We thought we were out of the woods, and he got the DTs because he'd been drinking since he was a little kid, and he was a hard drinker. And he got DTs. He tried to crawl out the bed. Another nurse and I, the guy was huge, big, big man. We gripped our shoulders up under his shoulders, and we were able to roll him back into the bed, and when he laid back, he expired. So we started giving him mouth-to-mouth. I gave him mouth-to-mouth. She called the code. The doctors came. They couldn't save him. We clean up, take care of everything, finish up our shift, go home to the queue, telling each other this story, and I realize and freak out because we'd been testing him for tuberculosis, and I just mouth-to-mouth resuscitated the man. I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So we waited, nothing happened. His tests all came back negative, and I never had any adverse effects. But you just remember those moments, and you go, wow, that was, and I was 22 years old at the time. I couldn't believe it. So then I moved to the Philippines, and we had two more memorable patients. One was a Navy fellow who had decided after he retired to stay in the Philippines, had no real family, but had a serious fatal disease, a fatal diagnosis, and all he wanted to do was have a cup of coffee and a cigarette. Well, he wasn't allowed to smoke in bed, so unattended. So I would stay after my shift for Art Cullinan to have a cup of coffee and a cigarette, because I was still a smoker back then, and I knew how it felt. So I came into my shift one night, and he was not there, and I thought, I guess I don't have to stay late after work every night anymore. Then I moved to Shreveport, and I really was only there 3 months and don't remember very much of that. These are some, I applied while I was at Clark. I applied for the 3rd class of women pilots, and the nurse corps was averse to me leaving them. They did not want to sign my application form, but I had friends in the Red Flag unit who wanted to let me get an endorsement from a 2-star general on my application, which really sealed the deal for me to get in, I think. But here is, whoops, went up the wrong way, sorry. Here's a picture of me at the bomb range in the Philippines, where the pilots would fly and drop bombs on bamboo targets, and then there'd be scorekeepers on the target range who would indicate whether or not they had done a good job. So I got to go one day on my day off with them out to the site. This other patient is a little Thai girl who came, and I don't think she had any military connection, but somehow somebody brought her into the hospital for us to take care of. She had extremely devastating neurological disorders, symptoms that we never put a name to. We don't know what she had. She could not speak English. Her mother could not speak English, and none of us spoke Thai. The Filipina girls who worked with us, the nurses' aides, I don't think even they were able to communicate with her very well. But the little girl, or her mother, I can't remember which, taught us to say sawadika, which is hello in Thai. It's the only thing I learned. And I don't know what her results were. I don't know if she survived or if she went back home and wasted away or what. But it could have been any number of things. It might have been a neurological toxin that she was exposed to. I don't know. But the doctor is Dr. Dan Randa. I hope I never forget his name. He was so good with her and so committed to looking for an answer that he never really found. This is me and Peter Dodge. Airman Peter Dodge became an A1C and refused a formal ceremony. So here he is with a plunger in his hand, saluting. On the back, he autographed this picture, and it says, "Thank you, ma'am." And he always called me ma'am. And I was like, I was about 3 years older than him. But I was a ma'am to him, and that was fine. He kind of reminded me of the characters you see in MASH, you know? And the last picture is me on a outrigger going to snorkel in the South China Sea, which I only did one time. And I jumped out of the water the first time that I could tell I didn't have anybody nearby. We were in a group, and as long as I could see somebody else's flipper in the corner of my mask, I was okay. But when they got too far away, I really had a panic attack. So, but those were the folks who helped me get my application completed for pilot training. So I did apply for the 3rd class of women pilots in 1978. Our first assignment was Hondo, Texas, where we did basic flying in with Cessna. There were 10 women in my class. 6 of them succeeded. After we've completed Hondo, and I did succeed there, thanks to the efforts of one of the instructor pilots, I was having trouble seeing the flare on landing, which is a certain point where you're driving into the ground and then you flare. And I couldn't see it when I was trying to do it until he took a piece of paper and he drew a perspective of a flight line. And he took that paper and he said, now when you see this happen, that's when you do it. He lifted that paper up, and all of a sudden I went, oh, that's what I'm looking for. And it worked. So I moved on to Williams, and I lived there for from March until August. I did fine in pilot training, but if you told me I was taking a check ride, I could not do what I knew how to do. If you know about test anxiety, it's basically checkitis is test anxiety. And I failed each check ride the first time I took it. And on the third increment of check rides, I failed it 3 times. And they said, Fran, you cannot be a pilot in the Air Force if you cannot take check rides. And so, to my great devastation, as Hank said, I was 12 when I dreamt of doing this. I was 24 when they said, you're not doing it. But I got 67 hours of flight time in a T-37, so that's worth something. And when I washed out, I owed the Air Force 2 years. If I'd have washed out in the first few weeks, I would have only owed them a couple of months or whatever. But because I was in there up to 6 months, I had to stay at least 2 years. So I went over to the personnel office and they said, what are you going to do? Are you going to go back in the nurse corps? Because I had to swear into the line of the Air Force when I went to pilot training. I was like, well, I don't know. Will they give me a job that I can finish my bachelor's degree? Because with an Associate of Arts degree, I knew I was behind the power curve with most of my peers. So the girl calls the assignments office and tells her my situation, and the nurse corps assignments office says she'll take what she gets and she'll like it. And you can tell that didn't float with me. And so she hung up the phone and I said, I will do anything else the Air Force needs, but I'm not going back in the nurse corps. And sometimes I wonder if it's their loss or mine, because I did love certain aspects of nursing, but there were parts of it I could live without too. Because like I said, you save a man's life, that doesn't count for a medal. But you bury 913 dead people, that gets you a medal. Typical military thinking, I guess. So, my first assignment was the supply squadron in Dover, Delaware. So I drove from Arizona through New Mexico, the Texas Panhandle, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and into Missouri. My brother got married in September that year. Then I drove from St. Louis to Dover. Lots of miles. I had no idea what I was doing because I did not know what an admin officer did, and they did not send me to admin school the first assignment. But I had a great squadron commander. I had 3 different squadron commanders in that time there, and all 3 of them were wonderful. I had wonderful enlisted NCOs who assisted me as first sergeant and office senior NCO in the admin office. Wonderful civilian secretaries and admin staffers who guided me, and basically any issue that came up, I would say, what am I supposed to do? And they'd say, well, here's the reg. And I would take the reg home and read it that night and come back, and that's how I learned how to do inspections in the dorm, uniform inspections, how to do Article 15s, how to do discharge paperwork, how to do OJT testing, how to do promotions. Everything I had to do, I had to learn how to do it. So I did that, and I was only there about 2.5 months, and we had a call from the base commander's office asking for volunteers, and he said, the only criteria is you have to have a strong stomach. And when I heard that, I thought, well, that's me. I went to nursing school. I worked in the nursing home while I was in nursing school. I took care of patients that had a lot of things that had to be done. So I said, I'm going to volunteer. My first sergeant said, oh man, you can't do that. I said, well, I'm going to do it. And he said, no, you can't. And I said, why not? And he said, if you go, I have to go too. And he was not fond of the idea of seeing a whole bunch of dead bodies. At first, we thought there would be 300 remains. The graves registration people of the Army had given us that number. The second number was 600, and the actual number was 913, plus 5 congressional staffers and the congressmen who were injured. The Army, bless their hearts, I salute them still today. They ran out of body bags, and they had double bag remains. Those were mostly the children that they did that with. And that was where I first heard the term post-traumatic stress disorder. One of our troops, when the children started arriving, what happened was they had practiced this where the children were on the inner circle, young people were in the second circle, and elderly or older, larger people were in the outside. When they all committed suicide and fell in on each other, those layers didn't come through by the helicopter estimates that the Army guys were using. When those bags got brought in that were double bagging remains, one of the fellows who was working, helping the FBI and the morticians, opened a bag, and there were 2 children about the age of his own. And I said, come away and let's go burn some trash, because we were using a lot of paper products even back then to protect ourselves. We didn't know what kind of diseases and vermin might be coming in on these remains. And so there were other things to do besides direct contact with the remains, but the Army and the FBI and the morticians did, in 4 weeks, process those remains. They tagged each one. They came in on 141s that had 9 pallets. Each pallet held 9 remains, or 9 caskets. And so there were 81 per aircraft. So it's a little more than 10 aircrafts. And our troops would do the equipment to bring them off the aircraft and transport them to the mortuary. And then the FBI would open the bags with, somebody be there to take notes and identify them by gender, age, description of their clothing. Almost none of them had anything identifying on their bodies to help us know what their names were. They were a lot of street people, homeless folks from the West Coast. Some of them had a letter in their pocket, "Dear Mom," no address, no name of who Mom was. Just really, really sad. But like I said, it gave me back the idea, because of my devastation of being washed out of pilot training, thinking 2 years and I'm out of here. I realized I had a lot of empathy for the people that were victims and the people who were working. And I figured out that I knew how to lead, I guess, is what it amounted to. So we did a great job, I think, and the city of Dover provided me with my first treasure, which was a coin, a commemorative coin from Dover, Delaware. It's not a unit coin, but it's a coin, and it's the first of my coins, and so I treasure it for that reason. It brings back a lot of good memories. It's on that table over there along with the shadow box and my other unit coins. So during the time at Dover after that, which was really a very short period of time before, by Christmas we were done. It had started around Thanksgiving. So it's about 4 weeks that the majority of the work was done. We then moved to, I then went on to Squadron Officer School in residence and completed my bachelor's degree at night school there at Dover. And then I moved to Pope Air Force Base, where I was the Chief of Base Administration and the Executive Officer to the Base Commander. And while we were there, there was a Black Hawk helicopter that crashed. There had been a crash prior to that of a different aircraft type, and flying officers had been filling the job of admin for the Safety Investigation Board. The Safety Investigation Board looks for causes, not blame. That's the first lesson I heard. But this guy that was the admin for the previous crash, he didn't know anything about admin. So everything he needed, he had to come to me and I had to do it. And I was fine with doing it. But then the next crash that occurred, I told the base commander, I said, if you want this done, just let me do it and it'll be fine. So that's what we did. And I was the Safety Investigation Board admin officer working for a board president who was brought in from off base and investigators. And we knew, the president knew it was a thrown rotor off this helicopter that probably caused this crash. But no one died in this crash, which is a miracle in so many ways. He auto-rotated into a tobacco field, and his back was broken, but all of the special ops troops that were on board survived without injury, which is incredible. And so this board goes out to this tobacco field for about 5 days, and they cannot find the part that he's looking for. And on Thanksgiving Day, they were going out again. And I said, can I come with you guys and see what you're doing? And he said, sure, because it was slow in the office. It was Thanksgiving Day. And On the drive out, which is about an hour's drive, he draws on a napkin a picture of the parts he's looking for, which is like a yellow thing that goes like this and some nuts and bolts. And I'm like, okay. So we get there, and they all scattered to the four winds. And I'm thinking, and I just decided there's a bramble bush over there. And I walked over, and I stuck my head up over in it, and I see this yellow. And I was like, Colonel? And he's like on me, and I'm like, there's something in the brush there? And he's like, that's it. He about kissed me. He didn't, but he just about would have, I think. And from that, they were able to proceed with it. They'd been held up because they had to have metallurgical testing done on this stuff and everything. Turns out they were using, dare I say, Chinese nuts and bolts that weren't right. Okay, political. I know that's a little political, but I think that was the upshot of the testing, of the board investigation. So we went on, we invaded Grenada while I was at Pope, and I completed Air Command and Staff College, and I quit smoking while I was there. And I don't know if any of you know who the Hash House Harriers are? Nobody? So in the Southeast Asia era, the British and the Aussies started this. I think in England they call it Fox and Hares, or Hares and Fox. And so one person's it, and you set a trail and you mark it. They used to use flour or chalk. You mark two dots on, 3 dots go back. And you set trails that took, and the point is for the hare to get home before the foxes catch you. And it's great fun. I was young and healthy. I don't do that anymore. The other thing that happened at Pope, we had an ORI MEI. And even though we had operational activities that were very successful, the ORI, Operational Readiness Inspection, was conducted. They bring in about a team of 60 to 75 people. And the Pope Air Force Base mission involved delivering palletized cargo on target. And I don't know, I wasn't in the ops side of it at all, but something went very badly wrong, and they failed the operational readiness, which was a big blow to the wing commander. The only unit that did get an outstanding score on the management effectiveness side was my administration office. The base administration got an outstanding, excellent, I guess it was called. And the wing commander felt like that was the one bright light in his life. So I got invited to go on a mid-rotation tour, the commander's tour. We went to Greenland, England, Germany, Turkey, and Greece, and back home through most of those places in a 7-day period of time. We got to visit the C-130 squadron that was overseas for a 3-month period. We were there for 1 week in the middle of their rotation to visit and see how their process was going. It was very exciting. It doesn't happen for very many admins. So I was really tickled by that. So my next assignment was Ramstein, and a base level squadron commander, and then a protocol officer at 16th Air Force. While I was there, President Ron Reagan visited Germany. He landed first in Ramstein and then proceeded by car, I believe, to Frankfurt. And that's when he gave his speech about Mr. Gorbachev, take down this wall. And I was not in Europe when the wall came down, but I remember how it started. While I was there, I also had a real devastating family tragedy. My sister, who was a year younger than me, Kitty was in that first picture of the family you saw at Christmas in '62. She was pregnant with her 3rd child, and she had a problem. The baby did not survive, and then she died as well. And it happens in 1 in 100,000 pregnancies. Her husband was a doctor. She was a nurse. They didn't do anything wrong. His partner was her OB man. He was a wonderful doctor. It wasn't his fault, but it devastated my parents, needless to say. And so I told him I needed to get back to the Midwest. I didn't care where, I would do whatever. Well, that was the year of the big budget cuts, and I was involuntarily extended in Germany. Instead of being there for 2 years, I was there for 3 years. So in January of '88, I was actually reassigned to Scott Air Force Base, which happened to be 45 minutes from my parents, which was much help for my mother and my father. But, so I arrived at Scott as a chief of base administration, and again, the executive officer. I took a stab at Air War College. I did all the classroom work. I never wrote the paper. So at this point, I was kind of tired of that sort of thing, but I was still doing good. And after about a year and a half at the base level, Headquarters MAC is co-located with Scott Air Force Base, and I was brought up. The guy who'd been the wing commander in Pope when the unit failed its operational readiness was in XO, the Operational Plans Office Directorate. He needed an admin, an exec officer. He knew I was at the base level, and so he brought me up. I think it just shows that, you know, if you do good over time, good things can happen. So I worked for him for about a year, and then he retired, and I was moved over to the XP Plans office, where they do more of the programming, budget, and stuff like that. During that time period, I also took up deer hunting for the first time. My family had property down in Perry County, and I had an elevated cholesterol level, and the dietitian said, if you're going to eat red meat, you should eat wild game. And I said, well, I know where to get some of that. So I had never shot anything. I'd shot the weapon. My dad had worked at Olin for a while in Alton, and we had been in the Winchester Western Club, and I learned to shoot when I was about 12 or 13 years old. But it was 22s, and I think we did fire a shotgun once. I didn't like that. It kicked. But my brother was a deer hunter. Both of my brothers were deer hunters. And so I said, hey, Jim, how do I do this? And he said, well, first you have to apply for a tag, and then you got to do this, and then you got to do that. He brought me a stack of magazines about like this, Field and Stream, and all kinds of things. And he had articles marked in each index of which ones I should read. And so methodically, each night, from April until about August, I read all of his assigned homework. I learned how to gut a deer by reading a magazine. Well, I had learned a little bit when I was in anatomy class as a nurse too. So, so I got my application in, and I got a tag, and I got a doe tag, which was an important thing back in those days because you didn't always know what you were going to see. And if it wasn't a buck and you didn't have a doe tag, you better not shoot it. But I got a doe tag, so I go out, and it's cold, and it's 3:30 in the morning, you're getting up, and you're out in the woods from 4:30 until 5:30 p.m., and you're hungry. And 2 days of that, and I didn't see maybe one deer. Nothing to shoot at, maybe 300 yards walking through the woods off over that way. The third day, I fell asleep in my tree stand, leaning back against the tree like this with my eyes closed, really meditating. The gun is in the corner of the box stand that I'm in, and a deer comes over the ridge. And I don't know what I did, why I woke up. I must have heard her. But I open my eyes, and I see this deer, and I go, okay, I got a doe tag. I can shoot that. It's about 35, 45 yards maybe. I get the 30-30, which I borrowed from one of my Air Force friends at Scott, and put the bead on her, and I was successful. Then it took me like an hour and a half to field dress her, and dragged her out by myself, and got her to my car, which was a Ford Explorer, what was it? It was an old Ford Bronco, that's what it was. Got her to my car, but some guys in a farmhouse that I passed to get to where my car was, and it was probably 1.25 miles from the deer stand to the car. So I'd done all this dragging, and these guys show up and they help me lift it into the car, and I'm like, well, it's a good thing because I was exhausted by then. Get home, I'm very happy, butcher my deer myself, get 25 pounds of meat. This was a fawn, except she didn't still have dots on her. But it was a very small deer, but it was the first deer I'd ever seen in the woods, and it was my success, you know. So I took up deer hunting, and I met my husband that year. That was 88. It took me 9 more years to get married. We don't do anything fast emotionally. Anyhow, these pictures show me in Germany. When I was in Germany, I did a lot of Volksmarching. This is my dog, Jenny. She traveled the world with me from Dover she flew to St. Louis when I went to Maxwell for SOS. She flew to Germany by herself because I had to wait until I was there before she could come and be quarantined. This was like one of the first weeks after she was out of quarantine. We got to go for a Volksmarch. While I was in Germany, I had a TDY to Spain for 6 weeks, I think it was. I got an incentive flight while I was there in an F-111. That's me in my G suit before we flew. Yeah, it was a blast. So, got back, like I said, from Scott. The first time I was at Scott, then my next assignment in '92 was to Lodges Air Base, and I was a squadron commander there. Got a few photos of them here. This is one of my friends, Kate Monjovi. She lives over in Belleville. And Nelson and Nancy Smith, and I'm thinking I don't remember where they moved to, and I've lost touch with them. But when I came back from Lodges was in '93, the flood of '93. And the deer cabin that I'd been hunting at for 5 years already is right on the Mississippi River in Perry County. There's a place called Tower Rock. It's in the river. My cabin is just south and to the west of that. This is my brother Jim in the shade. Timothy is standing next to me. He's younger than me. Me and my future husband were standing in about 2.5 or 3 feet of water. We had hiked in before the crest of the flood. This would have been in July, early July or mid-July, I think. It took us about an hour to walk 3 miles. It was brambles and brush and snakes and bugs and hot and humid and wet and nasty. To get to the building, you had to go through a field, and before that were some trees, and the trees had worms crawling up the trees because they didn't like the flood either. Eventually, the water crested at 6 feet on this building. This is a shed that is just 4 walls and a roof and a wood-burning stove inside. No plumbing, no electricity. And I lived in that for up to 2 weeks at a time from '88 until I got married in '97. I finally had a house to go to for deer hunting. There's an outhouse nearby it. That was what we used. And what we did, basically, we went down the first weekend and stayed until we couldn't stand it, came back to the city, cleaned up, and then came back down for the second weekend of deer season. Usually it's 10 or 11 days a duration of hunting. So, got home from Lodges, got to Scott, flood of '93, and then in '94 I got a cancer diagnosis. And it was thyroid cancer, and it turns out it was the form of cancer that you would like to have if you had to have cancer. It doesn't kill anybody, but till I figured that part out, I was thinking, my life is over. It wasn't. I mean, like I said, that was '94. It's almost 30 years now. But I had to have a total thyroidectomy and had to go through a lot of testing to confirm that it hadn't spread and it hadn't gone anywhere else, and there was nothing else to worry about. I did not have to have radiation therapy, but it made me reassess, where was I? 20 years in, and what have I got to show? My dog was about to pass on. I had her for 17 years, but I knew she wasn't going to be around much longer. And my husband and I had a couple of dates before I went to the Lodges assignment, but he never said he wanted to write or keep in touch or visit, and I thought, well, if you're not going to say it, I'm not saying it. So I didn't know where we stood, and so I just decided 20 is enough. And so I gave it up and moved on. What happened though in '93 is I have a cousin, my dad's brother, Gene, who you saw in the first family photo with the boys. His daughter, Jeannie, was a second lieutenant in '93. Went to pilot training and succeeded very well. She was top of her class, Bill Clinton was president, and she should have been allowed to have first pick of an assignment because of her being top of her class. Bill Clinton gave her that chance. She got to be a FAPE, which is a first assignment instructor pilot. She did that for about a year or two, and then she got selected to be an F-15 pilot. She's the first female fighter pilot in the Air Force. And here she is as a two-star general. This picture was taken within the last year with her niece, Megan Sochinsky, who is also a FAPE now. So the generations continue. It started before my parents, but it continues. And it's funny because it's mostly the women in our family that seem to be going that way. I don't know, I can't explain it. But Jeannie had great assignments. She was at Nellis. She was there when they produced the movie Captain America. She and the star of that movie, and that woman's name is Britt something or another, she shadowed Jeannie to find out how to be a female fighter pilot, you know. Jeannie was given some recognition from her alumni association at UT Austin. In her picture in 1997 with her is an Olympic swimmer, a cardiac surgeon, and Matthew McConaughey. So she's rubbing elbows with pretty high society, you know? But I'm very proud of her. My dad was exceedingly proud of her. So what happens after you do 20 years? I retired, I got my shadow box, I moved on. I first stayed in Belleville for about a year and a half. I took a part-time job, and after I had retired, in that part-time job, my husband and I met up because he was unemployed and the shop I was working for needed to move, and we didn't have the money to pay a big professional mover. So he came up, stayed at my house, and I said, are we ever going to go out again? And he said, I'm unemployed. I said, I'm a cheap date. Let's do something. We're not getting any younger. So I also had joined EGA at that time in 94, I think, or 93. And I got married in 97, moved to rural Missouri, Perry County, home of Altenburg, Perryville Pirates, St. Vincent's is the Catholic Church in Perryville. Apple Creek is a little tiny natural spring that has a Catholic church nearby, St. Joseph's of Apple Creek. There aren't a whole lot of claims to fame for Altenburg, but I like it really good. It's just fine. The big thing is in September we have a fair, and there's like 6,000 to 10,000 people show up for the fair in this town of 350 people. And how it comes off, I don't know, but it's amazing and it's always fun. I was a full-time homemaker. I'd never done that since I'd left home. I mean, I had to draw on what my mother said were chores to do to think, what am I supposed to be doing here? Worked in the church office for a little while, and we had some neighbors. They were elderly. They had one son only, and he did not live nearby. So when the eyesight was failing, I did the driving for the eye doctors, took them to get groceries and things like that. My husband had hunted squirrels on that farm since he was 16. Since he was old enough to drive, he would drive to Leroy and Eleanor's farm and hunt squirrels. He would give Leroy a red squirrel when he got an old red one, because that's what Leroy wanted. After about 3 years, and we had a dog, and Leroy loved our dog, and he pulled in the parking lot of our house, or the driveway of our house one day and said, I know, we had joked with him about buying his farm, and he never discussed it with us, but I think he finally realized that we had the assets. Where Lynn's family didn't, having me in the picture changed some things. And so he came in and he said, I know what I need for the farm. We're going to the lawyer on Monday. You come with us. He was willing to sell us the farm, and when he left the driveway that day, I said to Lynn, okay, let me go look at the bank book and see what we can do. And we were able to pull together an equitable agreement that everybody loved. And we actually took care of Leroy and Eleanor in this picture. After they got off of the farm, they moved to town. Eleanor had never driven in her life. And Leroy knew he was probably going to go first, and she needed to be where she could get some help. So they bought her brother's house in town after he had passed away. And we would go up and take him to supper, we would take him to the doctor and do everything. Well, Leroy passed away about 2 years after we began buying the farm, but, and then Eleanor passed 3 years after him. But we did everything. In fact, she came to my house in hospice in her final weeks. So they're not family, but they felt like family to us. And I started with a quote from my dad, which I forgot to mention on the first slide. My dad always said, "Lucky, better to be lucky than good." And one of the other ones he said, we had this on his cake at his passing: "Too soon we get so old and too late smart." And sometimes I know that's exactly what it is. So any questions? I know I took longer than I was supposed to, but I hope you got something interesting out of it. Do I just pull this flash drive? Yeah. Just pull it, okay. My pleasure.
She mentioned she has a shadow box
yeah.
on the table over there. So please take a look if interested. Maybe some of you have shadow boxes, I don't know. Also on the table over there are a couple more applications for honor flights. I know I had them before, but there's a few of them there. If they're all gone by the time you try to pick one up, let me know and I'll make more copies. And you have medals from the
the Missouri Veterans Recognition Program.
Yeah.
They have a coin that you get based on your time what period of time you were in service. And I brought 2 copies of that application if anybody needs one.
Yes, and I also had copies of this application, that one she's talking about, when we had the applications for the honor flights. So I think that's about it. Anybody have any questions? Well, thank you so much for coming. And thank you so much for Fran for the talk. I enjoyed it. So everybody have a good day.